Good morning, afternoon, and evening to colleagues across the Americas, Europe, and Asia. I'm Beth, Citron, Artistic Director of the India-based platform Terrain.art, and an independent curator, and a proud member of the Board of Trustees of AAMC. I'm presently in New York, and I acknowledge the seized lands of the Lenape peoples, but my work is largely in India. I would like to take a moment to recognize the tragic suffering from the pandemic presently ravaging the country, as we think of our colleagues in the region with empathy. It is a true honor to introduce today's keynote speaker, Suhanya Raffel, Director of the highly anticipated, ambitious M+ Museum of West Kowloon Cultural District Authority in Hong Kong. Suhanya Raffel leads M+ as a whole and oversees all museum activities, including acquisitions, programming, collections care, development, research, institutional collaborations, and museum operations. She joined M+ as Executive Director in 2016 and was appointed Museum Director in 2019. Suhanya's work at M+ and in her earlier roles as Deputy Director of the Art Gallery of New South Wales and as Deputy Director of Curatorial at the Queensland Art Gallery, Gallery of Modern Art in Brisbane, speak to her globally impactful leadership and field-shaping curatorial vision. One of her lasting and most important achievements in Brisbane included leading the Asia-Pacific Triennial of Contemporary Art. Under Suhanya's direction, successive editions of the APT became more diverse and inclusive, extending our understanding of the broader region while remaining rooted and in dialogue with local communities. For instance, APT 6, held in 2009 and which Suhanya curated, included for the first time artists from Turkey, North Korea, and Tibet, thus bringing the geographic limits of the region and culturally isolated places into a broader transnational dialogue. Through APT and beyond, this has led to nothing less than a discursive reimagining of Asia and the Pacific and their identity, presence, and position globally. As M+'s long-awaited opening nears, the promise for the field of contemporary art and visual culture is enormous and inspiring. I know that I'm among many in this audience who can't wait to visit. In the meanwhile, we are so grateful to Suhanya for joining us here, already late at night in Hong Kong, and I would like to welcome Suhanya to share her keynote address. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beth. And it really is a pleasure for me to be here today to be speaking with you. Before I dive into my PowerPoint, and I just wanted to take a little time to think about what it means to be in the cultural sector, because I think we need to reaffirm and restate and demonstrate our purpose to our communities again and again. We can never ever take it for granted. And especially when we've had to pause and reconsider how we program, who we program for, and prioritize our resources. Now, it's bracing work, but it's undertaken in a time, as we've just heard, we all acknowledge the social upheaval, the political dimensions, economic downturns, but it really does sharpen our thinking about the civic function of what our museums do. We are very important places that offer respite. They are places of reflection. Our museums are places of refuge often. They challenge, but they also regenerate. And we also use this space for cultural affirmation. The well-being of our communities are attended to not only in hospitals or parks for that matter, but also in museums. So in this case, I also think about our roles in terms of leadership and service, because they go hand in hand, and they imbue, and that spirit imbues our spaces with a sense of grace and purpose, which is really characteristic of our sustained creative endeavor in our institutions. The work is slow, and it's probably more accurate to say that it's slow release. It is an act of transformation that we are all working towards. Our sites are places where our objects, our collections, our programs are people-centric. These are about conversations and human beings, and they emerge from the witnessing of collisions, amplifications, contradictions, resonances that both our collections offer, but also specific to location and place. And that perspective is something we could never take for granted, and we need to be really alert to. It's complex, but it's also subtle work and essential for our communities to grow, for our audiences to understand the challenging times that we live in. It was, sometimes I think that these times are the same times over and over again, where we live in sort of circular times. But that doesn't necessarily help when we are having to deal with our everyday. And we have many stories, they're multiple, they're interdisciplinary and cross-cultural histories that we are responsible for presenting. And they provide a framework to embrace really the work of a public cultural institution. And that's why I do the work I do, because I absolutely believe in that project. In Empress, we have been thinking very deeply about this work, especially in relation to our region and what our voice is bringing in terms of perspective to a global cultural dialogue. The fact that we are about to open later this year has meant that in the years leading up to the museum being open, has given us a kind of interesting space without a museum to actually begin to work with audiences, programming, collection development, and amplify actually a lot of our online work, which had been established as a matter of course during a post-COVID scenario. Now, I also wanted to, let me now share my screen. Because I thought it would be interesting to think about the future of museums using Empress as a kind of case study. And to also talk about Hong Kong in relation to that space. Because of course, Hong Kong's location is very particular. We live in a city of just over 7 million, with an extremely dense vertical landscape. You're seeing work from our collection by Michael Wolff called Architecture of Density. It is also a financial center, it's a commercial port, it is a center for innovation, but it has now set itself out to develop cultural infrastructure of substance. And it has done this because it can see that to be a global city, culture needs to be a sophisticated and developed part of infrastructure. But to develop cultural infrastructure is complex. And so from the earliest days, Empress focused on the contemporary. And in one sense, this could be read as a simple institutional statement, but we established ourselves as a museum of contemporary visual culture in Hong Kong in 2011. We framed the first discussions around the nature of our project, and especially the collections, in terms of our roots in Hong Kong. Hong Kong was a way to explore and examine visual culture, and we feel it's absolutely important that we contribute new scholarship, a new canon, new perspectives on Asian histories. We know that so much of our parts of the world have been footnotes to different canonical art histories. My work in Australia was to argue to overturn that. So the description of the institution as Empress and its adoption also presents an important and revealing methodology. How did we arrive at describing the institution as M+? This was part of a public consultation process prior to the establishment of the institution, where my current board director chairman led a museum advisory group asking the people of Hong Kong what sort of museums they wanted. And during that consultation period, the consensus was a need for a group of museums, one for contemporary design, another for moving image, a third for visual art and ink, especially contemporary ink, and a fourth for Hong Kong visual popular culture. At that time, the advisory group advised the West Kowloon Cultural District, on which Empress now exists, that instead of doing 4 small institutions, do one singular large institution of visual culture. The Museum Advisory Group had a number of the committee members were made up of artists, of architects, of teachers, designers, people who were really, really involved in advocating for the kinds of museums they felt the city needed. But after the public consultation, this idea of a singular institution, they couldn't decide on how to describe the museum. So that they kept saying it's got to be a museum and more. And that's how M+ was conceived. It was born, and it was a very open-ended, forward-looking, emblematic symbol for an institution for our time. And it's a wonderful way of beginning a museum journey in one of the most extraordinary cities in the world. Now, the statement of M+'s relationship to the contemporary in this sense then also bears a closer reading. Engaging with visual culture of the present moment and of the recent past remains core to our museum's identity. Our ambition is to connect with what is happening now while reflecting urgencies. To define a new platform for presenting design and architecture, moving image, the visual art of our time, and to define a new emphasis in the global conversation on visual culture that's generated from Hong Kong in Asia. It is clear to all of us that we need to adopt a cross-disciplinary transnational perspective. And this is something that one learned while working in Queensland as well, that artists move and live where they need to make the work they do. But it reflects the complexities of a contemporary existence. Now, while it is important that this perspective may be easy to accept, grasping the ways in which it manifests itself in museum activities is far more complex. Exhibition making, talks, symposia, artist collaborations, research initiatives, digital projects, public programs, publications, all of which we all do. M+ also continues to do this, but exploring it through those seams. And of course, core to building an entirely new museum from the ground up was to build a collection that has to remain relevant, but also challenging the arena in which we live and stay current. These collections anchor our activities and the rest of the shifting dynamic ground of the present. So how can we use collection building, which is complex and necessarily and unavoidably accompanied by institutional gravity, how can we define a contemporary position? Now, our response to this question has been very particular to M+. The museum's work has been to build a collection that has international integrity while defining very clear areas of focus and narratives that are local. It's a point of departure for us, Hong Kong. We have not had the burden of inheriting a legacy of collections from the past decades and negotiating with past priorities. So we have, in many ways, an entirely new stage. Now, while this is done without the weight of institutional history, we remain extremely sensitive to another kind of weight, that of the need to articulate new points of view and to address gaps and absences in the existing ways of encountering, researching, and discussing contemporary visual culture. And our location in Hong Kong brings a distinct advantage in this regard, because we are a city that has blended the local, the regional, the transnational as it's intrinsic to the spirit and dynamic of the city. And our historical depth and geographical range is unique to the world in this way. So it is this character that informs the museum's collecting strategy and which conveys a global view from Hong Kong. The collections actually consist of the Empress collection, the Empress SIG collection, which was a founding collection of contemporary Chinese art donated to us by Dr. Uli Sig, and the collection archives. The archives are fundamentally the design and architecture collections and a special library collection. So we have a very broad collection expression. And it extends out of Hong Kong as our core to encompass Greater China as a region, through Asia and beyond. So read in this way, the collections are inseparable from the contemporary reality of our city. And how we display those collections are the next part of what I will talk about in a more free-flowing way. Now, if that is the curatorial thinking that has established how we move forward, I wanted to immediately put to you the key messages that the marketing team brings to us as part of framing this museum into the world, because it's this kind of collision that is often useful, but can be a tension, a productive tension. So the key messages for us is that we're bringing a visual culture museum from a Hong Kong perspective into the global landscape. It's a new edition. It's a new way to discover and see the world around us, and it enhances our reputation as a world city, which of course Hong Kong is, even under duress. It is a place for everyone and has something for everyone. And we have an incredible piece of architecture, which is also part of our design collection. Of course, it will be a must-see attraction in Hong Kong and Asia, but it is more than a museum. So we have decided and discussed establishing an institution as a lifestyle brand, and a public institution that champions and is globally associated with the term visual culture. So these are, this is the push and pull that the institution needs to manage in terms of a major piece of cultural infrastructure and investment. Part of the work that I did with the teams, my own board and key stakeholders is to start to structure and think about how what are the sorts of questions that we build moving forward. And we built our strategic plan around 4 key pillars of content, engagement, collaboration, sustainability. Again, these are absolutely, I'm sure you recognize this as part of the work you all do. But how we decided to organize what content is, what the curatorial department is our collections, and it includes all our digital work, our publications, and our research. And we set ourselves out to say we need to imagine and invent, interpret a new Asian canon through that multidisciplinary approach. We decided to absolutely state it like this. We also looked at engagement and collaboration around areas of exhibition. Our learning and interpretation curators also sit in the core curatorial team. And of course, scholarship comes through cutting right across all of that. And we do need to build an audience and a culture of museum going in Hong Kong. Asia in general is a new museum going a space. And there are many of us working in pioneering ways in terms of that relationship with audience. Right at the end, I will come back to what that audience looks like and the relationship the institution has with audience. And then finally, sustainability is one of the other key aspects of the work that we're bringing to the front. And I do want to talk about how we're approaching sustainability later on towards the end of my presentation, because I think it is something we all need to pay more attention to and think about it not just in terms of operational sustainability or capacity in terms of governance, but also staff and what staff sustainability means, and of course, environmental sustainability without question. And we do bring the issue, the sustainability piece of work across these areas of governance, staff, retail, commerce, and the environment. So let's go into the how we have expressed the collections for the opening of the museum. We will open only with collections. So this is, I'm sharing with you how we've structured the first suite of galleries around Hong Kong. Clearly, our location needs to play a very important role. And the issue of identity is something that is extremely volatile here. And we need to manage that volatility while still delivering. So our first galleries that the audiences will encounter will be our Hong Kong Here and Beyond. So this is not only Hong Kong artists, but how other artists around the world have intersected with Hong Kong as a space for invention and inspiration. So Blade Runner, for example, as a film, we will see parts of that within the Hong Kong and Beyond galleries. But we've dissected the spaces according to these 4 chapters, one looking at self, place, negotiating identities, and the future city. And one of the commissions that we have installed, or we are in the act of installing now, is a very, very interesting piece of architecture by Gary Chan, a Hong Kong architect, called Domestic Transformer. And I just want to show you a couple of minutes of a short documentary.
From Hong Kong. This is my hometown. Hong Kong now is unreasonably, if you buy an apartment, actually unreasonably high. Hong Kong now is even more expensive than Paris and Monte Carlo. I think on average, most people live in a space like 600 square feet, but for a whole family, like 2 to 3 or 4 people. Like my neighbors, quite a few of them still record the subdivided apartments. So that inside there's usually 3 rooms, and each room is actually for one family. You have to learn to live together in such a tight space. Either it's a disaster or you are very good together. But life is not too bad, actually. This is 360 square feet. This is actually my home for almost 40 years. And the beginning is the home of my whole family. My parents have 3 young sisters, and even we sublet a room to outsiders. At the beginning, there's actually 3 rooms here, you couldn't imagine. So the idea is mine is almost like a time-based design. Instead of me moving from one room to the other, I don't move. Actually, the home move for me. Like most of the walls can be moving on tracks on the ceiling. So with the TV room, actually what's hidden behind is the kitchen. I think I'm one of the few people in Hong Kong who seldom move their home. I would prefer to stick to the place and try to improve it and do experiments there throughout these 40 years, bigger or smaller. And if it's in the biggest position, I believe this is bigger than most families in Hong Kong for the size of the kitchen. I got a maxi or mini bar, and everything's pretty much included here. Dishwasher, huge refrigerator. Yeah, it's roughly 7 feet wide, so compact, but including everything needed. Another very important thing is when I don't need the kitchen, it disappeared and didn't occupy the space. So that's the trick. How I can do so many things within the 360 square feet. Is everything is organic and always not in a mode of permanent positions. The second one is actually my laundry room with the washing and drying machine. And after washing and drying, like what I did this morning, I put the clean clothes here in the stacks, pretty much organized. Another important thing is again, after finish the washing and drying, the laundry room disappear. This movement is actually one of the most important designs, is to make the operation user-friendly so that you want to do it all the time. Yeah. And
that's a very small snippet of Gary's work that he's doing in the Hong Kong galleries that, of course, as a design architecture museum, we also install. I just think it's an incredibly inventive way of thinking about design for living in extremely stressed circumstances that so many of us live in Hong Kong. So of course, then the SIG collection, From Revolution to Globalization, this is really one of the most significant collections of contemporary Chinese art. It is the most important collection of Chinese contemporary art to enter into an institution. And it is 4 decades that traces right back through to the avant-garde moment of Chinese contemporary art from the early 70s right through to the 2000s. It's the only institution in the world where you will see the depth of holdings like this. And again, the first iteration of the SIG collection hangs will be absolutely chronological. Now, we are extremely aware that in Hong Kong, there is a very, very strong market. And the market is almost, it vies with London and is second to New York. And the issue of thinking about value is very important for us at M+, because we know that we need to balance the market, which has grown so emphatically in the last 5 years here in Hong Kong, the art market, to ensure that we start to talk about value in very different ways for audiences. That is not just financial value that drives art, but historical, aesthetic, social relations. And the ability to bring a very significant collection like this as a core collection of M+, we know will make a radical difference to understanding history and histories and colliding histories. These are just some of the works from the SIG collections that we will be showing, of course. Then if Hong Kong and the Hong Kong Here and Beyond and the SIG collection From Revolution to Globalizations are geographically based, then there are a group of exhibitions that use narratives, a much more loosely narrated set of propositions to balance that. So things, places, interactions, where we will bring through a design and architecture-led hang. We'll look at, of course, Hong Kong as a lens, but then move through into including postmodernism and national new starts, how new modernisms and vocabularies grew out of this region. For us, it's very, very important to be bringing collections that you really will never see anywhere else but here. There are no institutions in Asia that are collecting design and architecture with visual art and a moving image. I mean, we're the only one. It's probably it's comparable to the Pompidou in that sense, or MoMA in New York, which has that breadth of collections. But we feel that it's so important that this part of the world takes purchase of the stories that we need to tell. Then the South Galleries will be driven by our visual art and ink collections. And they too will have a loose chronology on 2 arcs. One arc that looks at abstraction, and abstraction is a very, very interesting curatorial thesis, especially when you look at radical ink that comes out of an East Asian historical position, rather than an abstraction that comes out of an international or a Euro-American space. It's a very different language, and it's fantastic to bring in calligraphy and very, very large scale radical ink paintings together with work from India and the Middle East. And then a second arc that is looking at the idea of action to idea. And I know I'm going to run out of time, so I'm going to be much faster now. But I know that this is really interesting work to share with you, how we also look at globalization from this perspective here, where so many from the 80s and 90s became truly transnational artists working from Hong Kong, New York, Australia, and so on. We have one small suite of 3 galleries that are bamboo lined, a very unusual set of physical spaces that were designed for us by our architects. Our architects are Herzog and de Meuron, the very well-known museum architects, and they've been absolutely superb to work with. But they made these 3 galleries for us, thinking that that's where we would show our ink collections. And we, of course, will not show our ink collections there. We will show our collections of Duchamp, in fact, and use the idea of a valise and narrate, thinking about the valise as a portable museum. And in a city like Hong Kong, where everything is so compact, the idea of unpacking the valise as a metaphor for a new museum, especially in relation to our contemporary Chinese collections that use, or those artists use Duchamp as a tool, even though they never ever saw Duchamp in the flesh. We intend to kind of recenter or decenter Duchamp just by presenting him in the context of our collection of contemporary Chinese art. Then a final major display of Anthony Gormley's, it's an anchor work for us, the Asian Field, that consists of 180,000 figurines that he made in Guangdong, just over the border here in Hong Kong and Canton. And it's a social project that is extraordinary in many ways, and kind of a lyrical, poetic statement about what Hong Kong itself is thinking about in relation to the border and beyond. So to come to the work of sustainability, we have done some very pragmatic thinking about sustainability. We know that ICOM passed a resolution in 2019 that recognizes that all museums play a vital role in shaping and creating a sustainable future. And so we also need to think about how do we manage those or respond to the idea of sustainability. And especially over the COVID period, we have decided to maximize exhibition duration from 3 months to 6 months immediately. We thought we put so much effort into this. We will slow down the temporary exhibition program and make them longer. We will also reuse our temporary exhibition walls between 3 to 5 years. So we do not want to make and break the installation walls. We feel that it's a challenge for our designers and our curators to reinvent existing spaces into the future. And of course, audience activation is absolutely intrinsic part of the sustainability work, but so is workforce diversity. And I wanted to just take a minute to say that at Empress, we have over 25 different nationalities that we work together to deliver the institution. And I don't know that there is I don't know of any other institution that has such a diversity of workforce inside its skin, as it were. When I joined the museum 5 years ago, we were about 40 staff. We are now 250 staff, and I'm about to manage our docent program and casual workforce for just for the opening, because it's very uncertain what that opening is going to look like and what kind of audience numbers we are hoping to reach. But the workforce diversity also reflects the diversity of Hong Kong's cosmopolitan history and the fact that in other industries, whether it's finance or IT, that diversity is understood and established. So it's incredibly interesting and extremely exciting to be leading an institution with the diversity of workforce that is already embraced. And that means, of course, that working into the future, we are very conscious of building capacity into the city, because this is the first global institution being established in Hong Kong, and certainly and the reach, as I said earlier, of the institution, there's nothing like it in Asia. So that pioneering work means that we do an incredible amount of training and internships as well, because the future, the sustainability future of the institution is also depending on a culture of embracing the cosmopolitan history of this city into the future. And it is a strength that we discuss amongst ourselves, but also with colleagues and with our audiences. The other part of the sustainability work in terms of what the future of the institution looks like and audience is that when it's a business as usual time for the city, we welcome 80 million people in any year. There's no city in the world that has that kind of intensity of visitorship with a base of 7 million. So it's a very small city on one hand, it's a very dense city, it's a very vertical city, but at the same time, we welcome an incredible number of people in any year. Of course, COVID has put a stop to that. So when we open, in many ways, it's probably, I doubt that the borders will be open to the world, perhaps to mainland, to Taiwan, to Singapore, certainly, Australia, New Zealand, and perhaps Japan and Korea. We will see some of those travelers coming back into the city, but it's very nice to be able to introduce the institution to Hong Kong first, and that we have a moment of respite in a very, very active, intense city to make Empress for Hong Kong first. So our audience building, I wanted to end with audience building because I know I have 1 minute so that we have 10 minutes of questions. You know, when we went online over the COVID period, our last 5 months of audience engagement just over these online programs, we reached just under, well, 372,000 audience engagement. Our keynote, our Empress keynote, where we live streamed into mainland China, we had 26,500 audiences coming online and staying with us for a period of 2 hours during that talk. So the intensity of interest, the engagement of people, and we are finding that our audience average age is between 18 to 40, maybe 35. You know, it's a young audience. It's serious and it's engaged, which means that when Empress comes online as a major institution, it's going to be very interesting for us to see how we are able to welcome audiences of scale, but also young audiences. Very briefly, I just wanted to show you the schools programs that we do. We reach out to, 80, 85,000. This is just in the last 5 months of work. Family programs was about 17,500. And then youth. So again, you can see immediately where the core audience for Empress is in the young audiences. And we've realized that the need for a major public institution that is engaged in our world today, the world that is complex with very challenging realities, the museum offers a very important avenue to explore those history, that reality, including looking at histories, but also potential futures. So I just will show you our learning center, because we take learning very, very seriously, and we briefed in a learning hub, a house for learning, as part of the museum's building fabric. We didn't want to put learning at the basement. It is right in the core of our museum work. And if learning is through looking and reading, and a more traditional learning in the galleries, we will use the learning hub to actually learn through making and playing. We have very interesting moving image facilities as well in the museum, which also houses 3 cinemas and a major grand stair that we can have up to 500 people to watch live cinema or lectures. But we also have a media facade. Our tower houses an LED that's 66 meters high and 110 meters across. And we see this as a program space where people will enter the museum in the nights from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. at night, every night, and see our collections, our exhibitions. We will program artist commissions onto this media facade. And in a city where there is a lot of light and a lot of moving image commercial work, we want to ensure that the creative voice is added. So with that, I will stop and say thank you and take questions. Okay. How is Empress addressing the quashing of free speech and other civil liberties in Hong Kong and China more broadly? From an anonymous attendee. Can I say that, any institution, all of us as institutions, we work within the laws of our city. We will not break the law. But I also have to say that Hong Kong has an incredible amount of ability to show the works that we need to show. And we do that. I think it's very easy for the West to demonize certain aspects of what it means to have free speech. So let me tell you about an exhibition of which a third of our collection was well, the exhibition was at the Guggenheim. It was called Art and China. And a third of that exhibition was from the Empress collections. And 3 works were censored in New York because Peter didn't like the 3 works that were being shown, animal rights. So, you know, is that a squashing of free speech? Were artists not able to show the works that they would normally have been able to show? Yes, but it happens everywhere. And I think we all negotiate how we bring the work we need to our publics. That very same exhibition went to Guggenheim Bilbao and there were no problems. But when it went back to San Francisco to SF MoMA, it couldn't, those 3 works couldn't be seen by Xu Bing and Hyung Yong Ping. So it's very easy to just, you know, decide that this is the only issue that we face, but actually as a museum community, we all face this. And we need to manage how we bring the work we need to, while ensuring that none of us break the law. So how do you balance the local and global, especially during global pandemic, when arguably it is no longer safe to be global? I think we are all being global right now. I think there are 259 participants here, and one couldn't be more global, frankly. The issue is of physical contact and how we share our collections. I think that is a sustainability question as much as it is about post-pandemic moving forward. I think we are all exploring what that means, and I'm not sure that we all know the answers to that. I do think, though, that we need to collaborate more. We need to think more regionally as our audience base, but also think about longer term sharing. So if collections are to be moved around, maybe we share take longer to make those loans possible and share more regionally before returning them. We do need to think about collective human cultural capital, and that our collections do belong to all of us too. But how we share that, I think, is an issue about the environment, as you say. As a director, what kinds of steps do you take to ensure that your workplace is safe and equitable? That's ongoing work. It's not work that is ever finished. And I think communication is the most important aspect of ensuring a safe, diverse, equal workplace. It is always challenging when you have budget restraints, all kinds of issues around how do you balance your future aspirations, your need for research, your need to ensure you're building capacity, while at the same time ensuring a productive professional development for staff. It's ongoing work, and I think to be alert to it is the first step in ensuring that. Have you engaged local community beyond the initial surveys about cultural needs? Local community, yes, we do work very closely with communities, but not to survey the exhibitions or what we curate. that is, we do see that as specialist work that curators do. But part of a curator's work is also to research and be alert and working together with our local Hong Kong communities, of course. But the Hong Kong communities are broad and wide and include a range of people, from helpers right through to these transient international visitors that come regularly. There's about 18 million of the 80 million that are regular Hong Kong visitors. They're stakeholders with business and work here. So they are as important a set of community as those that are living here. So we do involve communities through our learning programs. How are you cultivating and engaging youth audiences? I have to say the youth audiences have been our most loyal and engaged audiences. I think it's because we are dealing with contemporary material and contemporary material across visual culture. And Hong Kong is an intensely visual culture city where we are saturated with advertising, with fashion, with design, with film. And our core work is an intersection across those different disciplines. It's also very, very clear for us in our learning activities that part of our programs that we offer are vocational alternatives. In the Hong Kong education system, there are no subjects for arts and culture at high school and even in primary school. It is just not offered as an alternative for work or thinking of future career. And for me and in our institution, we feel absolutely compelled to offer people and young people the chance to think about creative alternatives in terms of vocation. So that's why our internship programs are deep and long. We have had over 90 interns, paid interns, I have to add, over the last 7 years, and we're expanding that program. So it's a big commitment to training, and we find that it offers life skills for young people moving forward. Okay, another question about, can you speak a little more about audience engagement? Was it primarily mainland China and Hong Kong? And how did you design engagement? What I didn't tell you all or share with you is that everything we do is in 3 languages. So all of our programs are in English, in Cantonese, and in Mandarin. And we are now exploring 2 other languages, Tagalog for Philippine community and the French community here. So the engagement we know from our visitors, from all of the programs that we've been doing prior to the opening of the museum, that there is a very, very strong interest in the museum's work and the work into mainland China with live streaming talks and panel discussions and learning programs have only begun since COVID, frankly, because we had the time to build those programs. And that's been something that we've been able to think about now into the future. The data that we gather, we ask for volunteers. So one of the other major programs that we do with young people is a summer camp. So we haven't done it, of course, with COVID in the last year, and then we won't do it again this year, but we've done it since 2016. So we've had 4 editions of a summer camp where we invite 100 young people just on the cusp of moving into college to spend 4 days and 3 nights in a camp with 8 artist educators. And we now have a group of 400 alumni that are our key buddies. You know, they work with us in terms of trialing and discussing what is of interest to young people. And so that kind of engagement is ongoing and continuous. They have then moved and introduced us to friends. So we're building up a group of alumni that are part of the summer camp alumni and friends to help us with developing and cultivating youth audiences. So there was an earlier question about whether we do formal consultation. It's far more of an engagement now, and an embedded engagement. We also have a group of 530 teachers that work with us continually in terms of broadening, for us to help them broaden curricula and see how we can teach history or languages or geography using collections as an alternative source of thinking about their curricula. Could you please expand on your process of community consultation for planning of gallery layout? The formal community consultation was really about asking for what kind of museums people wanted. But in terms of community consultations for gallery layout, that's professional work that the museum teams undertake. But what we do know is that we, in Hong Kong, a major institution like this, to have public space that is also space for relaxing and just being in is very unusual. Even our major shopping malls really discourage people staying or sitting and relaxing. So we have designed our museum spaces so that a sense of well-being is an important and intrinsic part of the museum design. We are also in a park, and that makes it a very important relationship to the outside and the inside. The early work we did with our museum designers, Herzog and de Meuron, was using the climate, the fact that for 8 months of the year, it's very, very pleasant to be outside and inside, and to encourage that porous design so that for example, the Learning Hub, which is a house of learning, has a stepped roof, if you like, and we will use that roof to teach outdoor classes in, because it is also shaded. So in that sense, the design was also built through working with us as the museum, briefing in to the architects. But that was also knowing that in Hong Kong, like Gary Chan's domestic transformer tells us, the density of life here is so intense. It is really important to build into the museum a sense of generous space, because that is very unusual. You discussed establishing Empress as a lifestyle brand. Can you talk more about this? How did you determine that language? Are you looking at models outside traditional museums to reach audiences? Yes, that's absolutely right. We decided to think much more laterally and creatively, also in relation to Hong Kong. And Hong Kong is really a lifestyle brand city. It recognizes and enjoys playing and toying with what it means to make lifestyle right from the beginning, whether you're looking at early kung fu films and how that genre developed, right through to the idea of the future city, which the cinema world embraced so much with Hong Kong. So we did look at, we really thought outside the box to think about lifestyle as also part of museum. We're also thinking a lot about museum as a place of well-being for people. And so the opening or the suggestion, the invitation of lifestyle is to think about the holistic relationship of communities with the institution. It is unconventional and I think interesting for us. Now I know there are a couple more questions, but I also know that it's 10 past the hour and I'm not sure whether I should keep going or is that no, that's more or less the last sets of questions was about the positioning of the brand Empress and the lifestyle, which I've answered. Can you share a little bit more about the Museum Advisory Group? It was formed in 2006, very, very early before there was any construction on site. And the process, and it was a 3-year process of consultation with a report that was used for us to develop our acquisition policy and our and thinking about what our collections look like and then programming. So the Museum Advisory Committee produced that report, which has been seminal part of the structural thinking of the institution. I might leave it at that.